Picture this. It's Sunday afternoon, and the whole house smells of tomatoes, garlic, and meat that's been cooking so long it gives up without a fight. On the stove, there's a pot of sauce, so dark and thick that when you lift the spoon out of it, the sauce clings to the back and falls in slow ribbons. It doesn't pour, it drapes. And when you pull a piece of beef out of that pot, the meat opens at the touch of a spoon, no knife anywhere in sight. That is Sunday sauce. But here is the thing almost nobody tells you. Most people ruin it before noon with a single mistake, and once it's made, no amount of basil, no secret ingredient, no extra hour on the stove will ever bring it back. The secret was never a rare tomato. It's knowing exactly what has to happen before the lid ever goes on. Subscribe if your kitchen deserves the rules a Nonna never wrote down, and stay to the very end for the one test she used to know it was ready, without ever once looking at a clock. Let's be clear about what this is, because it is not a recipe. A recipe is a list, this much of that, this long on the heat. Sunday sauce is not a list, it's a sequence. A quick weeknight sauce has one goal, to be ready. Sunday sauce has a completely different one. It wants the meat, the fat, the tomato, and the thyme to stop being four separate things and slowly become one. That is not something you can rush, and it is not something you can fake with a spoon of sugar at the end. So here is the question at the very heart of it. How does a pot full of thin, watery liquid turn into a sauce thick enough to cling to every single piece of pasta without adding 1 spoon of flour or cornstarch? The answer is this whole video. It's which meat you choose and why. It's what you brown before the tomato ever appears. It's the exact moment the tomato goes in, the things you must not touch for hours, and how a Nonna knew it was done without ever looking at the clock. Get the sequence right, and the cheapest, toughest meat in the shop becomes the best thing on the table. Get it wrong before noon, and you'll spend the whole afternoon trying to rescue a sauce that was never going to come. And it all starts with the one-step rush sauces always skip, because it costs 10 extra minutes nobody thinks they have. Here is that first rule, the one people break the most. The meat never goes into the sauce raw. Most people take their beef, drop it straight into the tomatoes, and wait for it to cook through in there. It will cook, but it will taste boiled, gray, and flat because you just skipped the single biggest source of flavor in the entire pot. A Nonna browned her meat first, hard, in a little oil in the bottom of the pot, before a single drop of tomato came anywhere near it. She'd pat the pieces dry first, because wet meat only steams instead of browning. She'd salt them lightly and lay them in the hot pot without crowding, just a few pieces at a time, so they sizzled and seared instead of stewing in their own juice. She wanted a deep, dark brown crust on every side, and that crust is not decoration. When meat browns like that, hundreds of new flavor compounds form on the surface. It's the same reaction that makes a roasting joint smell so good, and every one of them dissolves into the sauce later. What meat? The cheap, tough cuts, the ones full of connective tissue, chuck, beef shank, short ribs, a piece of beef rolled and tied into braciole. Those are the cuts that don't just survive a long cook, they need one, and they reward it more than any expensive steak ever could. Skip the browning, and no amount of simmering ever gets that flavor back. It's 10 minutes of patience at the start, and the whole afternoon is built on it. Now, once the meat is browned and resting on a plate, most people do the second thing wrong. They scrub the pot. Look at the bottom of that pot. It's covered in dark, sticky, stuck-on brown bits, and it looks like a mess you should scrape into the sink. Do not touch it. That is the most concentrated flavor in the whole dish. A nonna poured in a splash of red wine, or a little water, or some of the crushed tomato, and while it bubbled, she scraped every one of those brown bits loose with a wooden spoon until the bottom of the pot was clean and the liquid had gone dark. That's called deglazing, and all that flavor you just lifted off the metal now goes straight into the sauce, where it belongs. Rinse it down the drain, and you've thrown away half of everything you just worked for. So, the meat is browned, the pot is deglazed, the base is beginning, but browning the meat is only half the trap. The next mistake is the one that leaves people with a sauce that tastes sharp, thin, and somehow unfinished, no matter how many hours they give it. Before the tinned tomatoes ever go in, there's a small step that quietly separates a good sauce from a great one, and it's the tomato paste. Most people squeeze it straight from the tube into the pot, where it sits tasting raw and slightly tinny. A nonna cooked it first. She'd add a couple of spoons of tomato paste to the pot, with the onion and garlic softening in the oil, and stir it over a medium heat until it changed color, from a bright raw red to a deeper brick brown, until it smelled sweet and toasted instead of sharp. Cooking the paste like that concentrates the tomato and takes away that raw, canned edge, and it lays down a deep, almost meaty richness underneath everything else. It doesn't erase the acidity, nothing does that completely, but it deepens the flavor so far that the sauce tastes rounder and more finished from the very start. It's 2 minutes of stirring, and it's the difference between a sauce that tastes flat and one that tastes like it has a foundation. And now, only now, the tomatoes go in, the crushed tomatoes, the passata, whatever she had, poured over that browned, deglazed, paste-rich base. Because here is the rule almost everyone gets backwards. The tomato does not create the flavor. The flavor is already there, built underneath it. The tomato brings body and volume on top of a base you've already made delicious. Pour tomato into a weak, pale, unbrowned pot, and all the simmering in the world will never fix it. The herbs go in with a light hand. A nonna wasn't throwing in fistfuls of dried this and dried that, a sprig of basil, a little oregano, a bay leaf, and she let the long, slow cooking do the real work. This is a sauce, not a spice rack. Then the browned meat goes back into the pot, nestled down into the tomato, and the lid comes on, and here is where people misunderstand the lid completely. The lid is not an on-off switch you set and forget. At the very start, a lid helps the pot climb back up to a gentle simmer after all that cold tomato went in and cooled everything down. But if you then keep lifting it off every 5 minutes to peek and poke and stir, you are doing real harm. Each time you take it off, the temperature drops, steam and flavor escape, and worst of all, you never let the sauce settle into a steady rhythm long enough to see where it's actually going. Later, for the final stretch, you'll want the lid cracked open, or off entirely, so the steam can escape and the sauce can thicken. Covered to build, open to reduce, and left mostly alone in between. So you set it to the lowest, laziest simmer you can manage, just a lazy bubble breaking the surface every few seconds, and you walk away. And this is where a nonna's kitchen taught its hardest lesson, which is patience, because from here the pot needs the next couple of hours mostly to itself. If you want everything she knew about building a sauce like this from the ground up, the pantry that's always ready, the 5 mother sauces, the rules for fixing one that's gone wrong, I gathered all of it into Nonna's Handbook, the wisdom she kept in her hands and never once wrote down, and the link is in the description below. Now, which brings us to the exact moment you clicked this video for, the moment a pot of thin red liquid stops being soup and finally becomes sauce. Here is how you know it's happening, and it is the whole point of the afternoon. After an hour, and then 2, the sauce changes. It stops being a thin red liquid sitting on top of the meat. You lift the spoon out, and the sauce clings to the back of it. It leaves a coat, and when you drag a finger through that coat, it holds a clean line for a moment instead of running straight back together. On the surface, you'll see a little red oil beginning to separate and pool at the edges, and that is not a fault. That is exactly what a well-made sauce does. It's the fat that has slowly rendered out of the meat, carrying flavor with it. The sauce has gone from watery to glossy, from bright red to a deeper brick red. This is reduction, and it happened without a single spoon of flour, just water leaving slowly over a low heat, while everything left behind grows more concentrated. The test Nonna trusted was simple. Spoon a little sauce over a piece of cooked pasta. If the sauce slides off and collects in a red puddle at the bottom of the bowl, while the pasta sits there dry on top, it isn't ready yet. When it's ready, it clings to the pasta and coats every piece. That thickness you clicked for is not luck, and it is not a secret ingredient. It is this foundation, built in the right order and then given time. The thick, clinging sauce you clicked for is right there in the pot in front of you now. But the pot has only started doing its work, because the meat still hasn't finished doing its own. Everything up to here has been about building flavor. This next part is about time doing something you cannot do any other way, with any ingredient. Those cheap, tough cuts you started with, the chuck, the shank, the short rib, are tough for one reason. They are full of connective tissue, a tough protein called collagen. In a fast sauce, that collagen stays tight, and the meat comes out chewy and dry. But over a long, low, gentle simmer, hours, not minutes, something quietly remarkable happens. That collagen slowly melts and turns into soft, silky gelatin. And it's that very same gelatin, dissolving into the pot, that makes the sauce itself feel so rich and glossy and full on your tongue. This is the single reason a slow-cooked cheap cut beats a fast-cooked expensive one every time. The expensive steak has almost no collagen to give, so it has nothing to hand the sauce, while the tough cut spends the whole afternoon melting its richness into everything around it. It's also why a real Sunday sauce seems to coat your mouth in a way a jar of sauce never will, no matter what the label promises. So the tough meat doesn't just become tender, it gives its richness away to the whole sauce as it goes. That is exactly why Nonna reached for the cheapest, toughest cut on the shelf on purpose. As she'd put it, cheap meat isn't cheap if you rush it. Give it time, and it becomes the part everyone fights over at the table. How long is long enough? That truly depends on the cut, on the size of the pieces, on how low your simmer really is. It is not a number on a clock, it's a texture. You're done when a piece of that beef gives way the moment you press it with the side of a spoon. The one thing you do have to watch through all those hours is the heat. It wants to be the gentlest simmer you can hold, a bubble rising lazily to the surface every second or two, never a rolling boil. A hard boil doesn't cook the meat any faster. It just seizes it up tough, throws the fat out of the sauce instead of into it, and risks scorching the bottom of the pot. So Nonna kept the flame low, and every so often as she passed, she'd give the pot one slow stir from the very bottom to lift anything settling there before it could catch and turn the whole batch bitter. Low, slow, and a gentle stir when you walk by, and not everything goes into the pot at the same time. The tough cuts, the short ribs, the braciole go in early because they need every one of those hours, but the meatballs go in later, well into the cook, so they finish gently in the sauce without drying out or breaking apart into the pot. Nonna would brown her meatballs first, just to set the outside, and then lower them in for the last hour or two, long enough to drink in the tomato and give their own flavor back, but never so long that they turned to mush. Italian sausage, browned first and slipped in partway through, does the same, seasoning the whole pot with fennel and pork as it goes. Everything on its own clock, all of it in the one pot, and by the end they've all melted into part of the same thing. That is what people really mean when they say a sauce tastes like Sunday. Not one flavor, but every one of them dissolved into a single, deep, unforgettable whole. Knowing what goes in when is the whole difference between a method and a mess. And by now, the kitchen smells finished, which is precisely why most people make the final, most heartbreaking mistake of all. The sauce tastes a little sharp, a little acidic, and the reflex, the one almost everybody reaches for, is to tip in a big spoon of sugar to cover it. Slow down. Nonna tasted first, and she tasted after the sauce had reduced, not before, because a young, watery sauce always tastes sharper than that very same sauce will taste once it's concentrated and had its time. If it is still sharp after it's properly reduced, she'd ask why before she ever reached for the sugar. Was the tomato paste never really cooked out? Did the sauce simply not reduce long enough? Is it just under-seasoned, needing a little more salt to bring it round and balanced? Sugar is not forbidden. A small pinch has its place in some sauces, but it is the last thing you reach for, never the first, and never a way to paper over a sauce that just wasn't given the time it needed. And more often than not, the real fix isn't sweetness at all. A pinch more salt will round the sharp edges off a sauce faster than sugar ever could, because salt doesn't cover the acidity, it balances it. The sugar reflex is really a patience problem wearing a disguise. It's what people reach for when they tasted too early and reduced too little, and want a shortcut to a depth that only time can actually give. Diagnose it before you sweeten it. And here's a rule that feels like it couldn't possibly matter, but does. Let the sauce rest. When Nonna's sauce was finally done, she did not rush it straight to the table. She turned the heat off and let the pot sit, even just 20 or 30 minutes, and as it settled, the flavors pulled together and rounded off. Some families swear a Sunday sauce tastes even better the next day, and there is nothing magic in that. It's simply that the pot has had time to settle, for everything in it to marry. Cooking is not only the heat, some of it is the quiet waiting afterward. It's the very same reason a stew, a chili, a pot of soup all taste better reheated the next day. The flavors have simply had time to move into one another and settle into balance. A Sunday sauce made in the morning and served at 2 is a wonderful thing. That same sauce, cooled, kept overnight, and warmed gently the next day, is often something else entirely, deeper, rounder, more completely itself. So if you can, make it a day ahead. Time is the one ingredient this dish can never have too much of. And then there is the very last place a whole afternoon of work gets thrown away, in the final 2 minutes, the pasta. Most people boil the pasta, drain it bone dry, pile it into a bowl, and ladle the sauce on top. And that is exactly how you end up with a plate of plain pasta swimming in a red puddle. Nonna never served it that way. She'd drain the pasta a minute early, while it still had a little bite left in it, and then finish cooking it right in a pan with a few ladles of the sauce and a splash of the starchy water it boiled in. In a minute or two, the pasta drinks the sauce in, and that starch pulls everything together, so every strand comes out coated and glossy. A coat, not a puddle. That cloudy, starchy pasta water is one of the quiet secrets of every good Italian kitchen. A splash of it, stirred into the sauce with the pasta over the heat, is what makes the whole thing turn silky and cling together as if it had been bound with butter. Italians even have a word for that final marrying of pasta and sauce in the pan, mantecatura. It sounds like a fancy technique, but it's really just the last unhurried minute, where the two things you cooked separately at last become one single dish. The sauce and the pasta stop being two things, which is the entire reason you did any of this. So how did Nonna know, in the very end, that it was truly ready, with no timer, no thermometer, nothing written down anywhere? She had a test, and it's the one I'll leave you with. In the last stretch, she took the lid off and let the sauce reduce, uncovered, watching it go darker and thicker. Then she'd drag the spoon slowly across the bottom of the pot. If the sauce parted and left a clean path across the metal for a second before slowly closing back over it, it was there. In a sauce reduced that far, you can very nearly stand the spoon up in it. It'll hold, leaning, for a few seconds before it finally gives. That's not a law of physics, but it is exactly the kind of thick Nonna was chasing all day. And the final proof was always the meat. She'd take one of those short ribs, the ones that went in tough and cheap and forgotten hours ago, and press a spoon against it, and it would simply fall open into soft, glistening strands, no knife anywhere in the room. The short rib that cost almost nothing at the shop that morning is now the thing everyone at the table reaches for first. That is the whole quiet magic of it. You didn't add anything expensive. You didn't add anything rare. You simply refused to hurry, and time turned the cheapest ingredients in the kitchen into a meal a restaurant would be proud to put its name on. That is the whole thing, in one pot. Because here is the truth underneath every single step of it. Sunday sauce is not difficult because it hides some secret ingredient you don't have. It is difficult because it asks you to do the one thing a modern kitchen is built to avoid, to stop trying to finish it early. Brown before you build before you add, then give it the hours it asks for, and leave the ending alone. Every step is one small act of patience stacked on the last, and there isn't a single one you can skip to save time without the whole thing quietly coming apart. The browning, the fond, the cooked-out paste, the low and lazy simmer, the resting at the end, not one of them is difficult, and not one of them is a secret. They each simply ask you to wait. That is not a recipe, that is a ritual, and it is why the whole house knows it's Sunday long before anyone says a single word. If this is the kind of kitchen wisdom you want to keep, the rules Nonna knew in her hands and never wrote down, then subscribe and cook the old way along with us. And here is one more that goes hand in hand with a pot like this. The cast iron pan Nonna would have browned that meat in, the one she kept for 50 years and passed down to her grandchildren. Everything about how to season it, use it, and bring it back from the dead is in the video on your screen right now. Go and watch that one next. Waste nothing, taste everything, and whatever you do, never rush the sauce.